There really is nothing new under the sun, is there? As the recent revelation of a new Matrix tells us, demonstrates the very notion of another Matrix film now is potentially very interesting. Potentially very interesting. Of course, just like any resurrection of an established franchise, it could just be a cynical cash in. It could very, very well be just like another Aliens film or another Terminator film. That said, having looked at the trailer, I actually have found myself coming away with a little bit of hope. It looks fascinating. It looks like it has the potential to actually be a very decent science fiction film indeed. And that may be due to lots of different factors. I mean, the original Matrix made a real impact, and I still don't think most of the analyses really do it justice. There are lots of problems with The Matrix as a work, which we've discussed before on this channel. I mean, there's the fact that it is this giant grab bag of different influences, which, depending on which side of the fence you stand on, could be regarded as either A, influences, or B, rip-offs. You know, it is a giant anime film that draws on influences as diverse as Ghost in the Shell, Akira, obviously, and also literature such as Neuromancer, cyberpunk stuff, William Gibson, practically the existential science fiction of Philip K. Dick is very much in place there. But what I find fascinating about the original Matrix is what it said about our society at the time, and that's one of the big problems. It's one of the big misapprehensions of science fiction. Certainly to, I mean, I hesitate to use the term, but to lay people who don't really read that much science fiction or understand it that much, they tend to think that it's futurist, that it's looking forward, and that it's playing with the potentials of science. That generally isn't what science fiction does. Not universally, but generally it's not what science fiction does, and the Matrix is a really good example of this. It isn't commentary on what might be, it's commentary on what is, and what has always been. That's the problem people have with things like 1984, for example, dystopian fiction in general. There's this horrible misapprehension that it's a warning. It's not a warning, it's a commentary. It's a commentary on what is and what has always been. 1984 is not a projection of a dystopian future, it's a commentary on a dystopian present. It's exaggerated, it's distorted, it's slightly hyperbolic, but that's just for the purposes of drama, that's just for the purposes of narrative. Dystopia is one of those strange concepts where you don't know when you're living in it. By and large, you don't know when you're living in it, which is why when people of my particular philosophical and political persuasion say to people, we are now living in the ruins, the dystopic ruins of a failed neoliberal project, they tend to think that I'm engaging in hyperbole, or that it's somehow distorted, a distorted perspective, it's exaggeration. No, we are. I mean, there's no question about it. This is what dystopia looks like from the inside. This is what it looks like from the inside. It doesn't necessarily have to be a wasteland, you know? It's much more subtle and insidious than that. And that is something that The Matrix really commented upon in 1999, you know. The Matrix itself as a concept is insidious. You don't know what it is because it is the measure of your reality. All of your assumptions are based upon the simulation. Therefore, you can never tell what is a simulation and what isn't. And this is actually one of the problems with the film, in that ultimately it does establish that there is an absolute physical reality and there is a simulated reality. It does play with the notion a little bit, but it never really goes deep enough. The problem is, if you operate within a simulation and if you are born into a simulation, you will never be equipped with the tools or the perspectives or the contexts to discern what is a simulation and what isn't. You will, even if you emerge from one simulation into what ostensibly appears to be another reality, it could just be another layer of the same simulation or a different one entirely. Hey, maybe it's simulations all the way down, right? It's impossible to say. That's a problem with the Matrix films in general. They don't really go that deep, and they really should. But one of the things that I found fascinating about the Matrix as a franchise is what it expressed about the then of 1999. And what it expressed about the then of 1999 is just how sad and tired we all were of living in these failed dystopias. How utterly done, like existentially finished we were collectively with living within neoliberalism. That's what the Matrix is all about. Although the Matrix is presented in the films as though it's generally a negative thing, it's something that you should want to escape, the fact of it is actually celebratory, and we see that in the rebirth scenes when people wake up from the Matrix. By casting the reality that we know, that is familiar, as a simulation, the films ultimately say, you know what, it doesn't matter. All of the shit you've been living in, all of the stuff that dissatisfies you, it actually doesn't matter because it's not real. You can actually leave it behind. There is a Gnostic way. It's very like, it's old fantasy. It's like Narnia and fantasies of a similar bent. You can escape. There is a way out into another reality. And although this other reality appears to be like industrially dystopian, and although it's drawn as being this really harsh environment, you know what? It's better. The film portrays it as being better on an almost spiritual level than The Matrix, than this shit, than this banal, mechanistic, just going through the motions existence. And that's the real significance of The Matrix. It expresses this incredibly 1990s ennui, in the same way that our music of the era did. I mean, Nirvana, Kurt Cobain was all about this. He was expressing the ennui and the boredom and the lack of purpose and poetry of an entire generation, and The Matrix does that too. This is part of why it was so big. Forget the visuals, forget the style, forget the sort of surface reading of The Matrix, forget the Baudrillardian stuff. And forget the excuses that it allows you to basically be a superhero. You can kind of do what you like. That's another thing that the notion of a simulated reality does. It gives you license, right? And in The Matrix, that's taken to the nth degree. You can cause absolute carnage in The Matrix. You can kill hundreds of people, and it doesn't matter, because they do. Our heroes do, all the way through. They kill hundreds of people. It doesn't matter. You are freeing people from the simulation, and you are disrupting the simulation. Nothing has any real consequence in that world. And that's what it does. All of the forebodings, all of the doomsaying, all of the impending disasters that people of my generation, like the sort of early millennials and later, have been fed since before we were even weaned, all of that goes away. All of that goes away if you accept or even consider the notion of a simulated reality. And it's that The Matrix is tapping into. The notion that you might be able to escape. There's something wonderful about that. And also on a more sort of Gnostic metaphysical level, and almost like a William Blake level, that the simulation is malleable. That you might be able to twist and turn and transform it. You might actually be able to alter the state of being in the manner of sympathetic magic. The way Neo and the other freed minds of humanity manipulate the Matrix when they're jacked into it is not a million miles away from sympathetic magic. It's no mistake that the language used in the Matrix is that of various, not just occult, but sort of spiritual tradition. So there's a bit of Shintoism, and there's a bit of Taoism, there's a lot of Buddhism. Oh my god, there's a lot of philosophy that goes hand in hand with martial arts and whatnot. A lot of Eastern philosophy, interestingly. And that's no mistake. That is no mistake whatsoever. interestingly, since those days, the Matrix has been reclaimed in a way as a trans allegory, which it is. But it's a trans allegory that actually goes beyond the scope and the context of gender or sex. It's more existential than that. It's a trans allegory that throws into question the notion of what we are, of our humanity and of our consciousness, and that's what it should do. That's what good cyberpunk does in general, you know? I would urge anyone listening to this to go and read Neuromancer, which is a massive influence, such a huge influence on The Matrix, I can't even tell you. I cannot even tell you. There's so much that's... I mean, actually, William Gibson gave his blessing to The Matrix and has been very kind about it, but there's a lot of shit that's lifted directly out of William Gibson's novels and put directly into The Matrix. I mean, the notion of Zion, for example, the city, that is from Neuromancer. Almost every element, like the technical elements, are all from Neuromancer. Now, this new film, for it to work, it's going to have to do what the original Matrix did, for better or worse. It's going to have to tap into the zeitgeist of the now. It's going to have to provide a cultural commentary that is particular to our current circumstances. You have to bear in mind, it's a decade on. Things have changed. Things have changed dramatically since 1999. So it's going to have to provide a similar catharsis. It's going to have to provide a similar commentary. That's why remakes and reimaginings and reboots fail almost universally. Not universally, but almost universally, because they are not reimagined sufficiently in order to comment upon what is happening now. And therefore all you get is this vacuous, empty thing that looks like something from the past, but says nothing, has no deeper resonance. In order for them to work, they have to be reimagined to comment upon the now, or be resonant with the now. It's why John Carpenter's The Thing works so well, as Kit and I discussed in our episode of What the Hell is Wrong with Us. It's why it works so well, because John Carpenter took the base material of the original short story, Who Goes There, and reimagined it for the 1980s, consciously or otherwise. I mean, it may not necessarily be that the Wachowski sisters, for example, when they came to make The Matrix, sat down and thought, well, okay, this is what we're going to reflect. It may just be that these were the concerns that were in their minds at the time, because they are children of this era in the same way that we are, you know? That's what The Matrix was tapping into, and the new one is going to have to do that. And, you know, having looked at the trailer, I am quietly hopeful. I'm hopeful. I hope that it isn't just a soulless cash-in. I hope that it's not just a corporate exercise, because that would ironically be entirely contrary to what The Matrix was trying to do. Whether it succeeded or not depends upon your particular persuasions and interpretation of the text. But if it can do that, if it can provide catharsis and commentary, it could be an amazing piece of work, just as amazing and influential and impactful as the original was. Who knows? Who knows? But the trailer looks good. There's a lot of interesting ideas and imagery in the trailer that gives me a little bit of hope. But let's see, eh? Let's see. I mean, it's happened before. It's happened before. The Joker came along and just blew my mind. I thought it was a spectacular cinematic work. I was so impressed by that piece of work. I was so impressed by how brave it is and the commentaries that it makes. Let's see if the same can be true of this new iteration of The Matrix. I don't like the subtitle, by the way. It's such a lazy subtitle. Resurrection. Just, you know, any film, certainly the sequel or a remake or a reboot of a popular franchise that has an R subtitle, revelation, resurrection, it's usually a mark of laziness. But let's see if it works, eh? I sincerely hope so. Go and read William Gibson. Go and read Neuromancer or Burning Chrome or one of those really hard-boiled cyberpunk pieces of work. What I love about Neuromancer is a great book, and what I love about it, first of all, it was written in 1984 when I was born, and that is amazing. When you look at what's actually in it and what it comments upon and what it predicts, that is absolutely incredible. But what I love about Neuromancer is it's so dense in terms of its own language, its own mythology, that you just lose yourself in it. There is a plot, there is a narrative, but it's so buried in all of this existentialism, these virtual projections of state and self, which throw into question the nature of any waking reality at all. That's another thing with the notion of simulations. The moment you don't have to actually have a simulated reality for this to work. All you need is the concept of simulated realities. And then the notion of there being an objective reality just goes out the window completely. And we have the concept of simulated realities, as is demonstrated in The Matrix, but also in lots of other areas as well, in video games, in literature, in film, in all sorts of different arenas. We have simulated realities. And the moment you have that, that's it. That's the end for the notion of there being any objective waking reality. There's no parameter by which you can determine which one is absolute, if indeed any are. If indeed any are. We just can't tell, especially if we are born into the simulation and all of our assumptions and parameters of reality are defined by it. There's no way you can possibly tell, because you don't know what reality is, or even if that means anything. You will never be able to tell. We will never be able to tell. That's the irony. That's the fun of it. And it's a shame, really, that the original Matrix doesn't go there. I'm wondering if this new one will. I'm really wondering if this new one will. You know what? What if the machines are operating in a simulated reality? What if everything we've seen in the Matrix thus far, all of the levels and layers, are just part of a program that the machines are experiencing? Who knows? Who knows, eh? That's the thing, isn't it? The moment you bring up the notion of simulated realities, it becomes an infinite regress. You can never tell. You can never determine. You are not equipped to determine. None of us are. That's the fun of it. There's a real sort of existential anxiety, but also a freedom, a liberation that comes from that. Anywho, thank you for listening to me waffle on as per usual, and until next time, my dears, bye-bye!